afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. I hope you're having a fantastic day here at the museum and enjoying your visit, enjoying your day. Here inside the SCCU Daily Planet Theater, I am your host for our Lunchtime Discovery Series. My name is Chris. Welcome. And our Lunchtime Discovery Series we host every day. Can you hear up there? Can't hear a thing. Check. 1, 2. Well, we'll work on that. I don't know what. Or everybody can come down and grab a seat on the first floor. It looks good for the camera, too, if you're all down here on the first floor. Otherwise, they'll just keep it tight on me. Well, we'll work this situation out. Check 1. There we go. That sounds right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the SCCU Daily Planet Theater. I am your host today. My name is Chris. I'm curator for the Daily Planet Theater and your host for our weekly Lunchtime Discovery Series every Wednesday at noon here inside the Globe. The museum and the Office of Environmental Education out of the Department of Environmental Quality bring you fantastic speakers who are passionate about science, nature, technology, the environment, and all things in between so that you get the chance to learn what cool and interesting things are happening pretty much right here in our own backyards. We learn from some of the experts, and we have lots of great people in the state of North Carolina doing amazing science and nature work. Today's guest works out at Fort Bragg. Brian Ball is a part of the endangered species branch there. He's a wildlife biologist helping keep track of some of the many incredible species that call North Carolina home, and military installations have lots and lots of space. So there's a lot going on at these places, and places that you might not think are doing wildlife conservation in the ways that they are. So I think today we're going to get a great perspective on some of the work that's going on here in our own backyards in North Carolina, the land of the longleaf pine. Please welcome to the stage, Brian Ball.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'd like to thank the museum, everybody for having me, Chris for introduction. As he said, my name is Brian Ball. I'm a wildlife biologist on Fort Bragg. I've been there since 2002, so I've been there for a while and seen a lot of things change. Today I'm going to be talking about Fort Bragg itself, the longleaf pines, and then the Saint Francis Satyr, one of the rarest butterflies in the world. Little outline. First, like I said, I'm going to introduce Fort Bragg. It's good to have that perspective of what we're dealing with when we're managing land there and working with these species. Then I'll move to the longleaf pine and the ecosystem we have, some of the endangered and rare species, and then the Saint Francis Satyr will be the last half of the talk. Fort Bragg is located in North Carolina. It's in the Sandhills region, which is located between the Piedmont here and the coastal plain. It's a thin strip of sandy hills that goes from North Carolina, South Carolina, and into Georgia. Fort Bragg itself is here, and this is Camp McCall. Those are managed as one property and separated by probably 5 or 10 miles. The base itself was established in 1918, so it's been over 100 years. And most people don't realize how big the base is as far as personnel. Daily on the base, there's over 50,000 active duty troops. There's over 9,000 or close to 9,000 civilian employees, 3,500 contractors, and over 60,000 family members. So that puts Fort Bragg at somewhere between 10th and 15th largest city in North Carolina. So it's a big, big place. It is also home to the 18th Airborne Corps, Army Special Forces Command, and the 82nd Airborne Division. And in 2012, I believe, the U.S. Army Forces Command came to Fort Bragg, making Fort Bragg the most important military installation in the United States besides the Pentagon. Also home to the Golden Knights parachute team. So Fort Bragg's all about quick deployments, getting in, hitting hard, getting out. So paratroopers, it's all about the paratroopers on base, special forces. They do use a lot of these howitzers here, these heavy artillery. Lots of helicopters. So the base itself is 160,000 acres. 120,000, that is actually forested acres. The red, the big red here, these are impact areas where we have 83 live fire ranges. So these are actually areas where they're shooting into, so pistols, rifles, machine guns, and the heavy artillery. The green color, those are drop zones. These are basically grasslands, open areas where the paratroopers are jumping into. Have close to 1,000 miles of roads on base. So for some perspective, let me see. Right in here, that's a drop zone, the Sicily drop zone, Normandy drop zone, big, huge open grasslands. Impact areas, this is Coleman impact area. And when people think impact area, they're thinking bombs dropping, explosions, complete destruction, right? Well, that is the case where the targets are. So like right here is the impact box for Coleman. This is where the heavy artillery is shooting into. That is Moonscape. But around that, this area here, all around it, I'm struggling with the dot, but anyway, around that box is where the actually get some really wonderful, beautiful habitats. We also have convoy ranges, like here's a convoy range, small arms ranges, so up here you can see like a rifle range right there. The 1960s and 70s, Bragg was having a huge problem with wildfires. They were really destructive. They couldn't stop them, and so they put in a system of fire breaks. So every quarter of a mile on Bragg, we have a grid of dirt, sandy trails. We also have a bunch of streams that run north-south, which maximizes the number of stream crossings you can have on really sandy, erodible soils, right? So this is probably one of our biggest environmental issues we have on base, in my opinion. It's a tough one to fix. The roads are there. It's kind of hard to stop that erosion, but it's something we're trying to work on. DoD itself, when we talk about conservation, a lot of people don't realize how much effort DoD puts into conservation. The primary goal is really, DoD is all about training. You have to train the troops. They want the land to be the same today for soldiers as it was for soldiers training in World War II, and the same for soldiers training for our next war 50 years from now. So it's very important that we can keep the land the way it is. Inherently, what the Army does is destructive, right? So we try to minimize that and make sure the land is sustainable. Additionally, we got to follow federal laws. So we got that. We do have compatible use too. It's for training. We have environmental issues. We have cultural resources, and we also have recreation. We have hunting, fishing on base, biking trails, hiking trails, that kind of thing. DoD manages over 25 million acres of land, so it's huge. We have over 420 large military installations. That's over 500 acres apiece. And there's 425 threatened or endangered species on these bases, so there's a lot of rare species. Since 1991 2016, 25-year span, DoD spent $1.3 billion on threatened and endangered species. They put a lot of money into it. And it seems like it pays off. So this is a graph I got. It's actually from Nature Serve 2007, so it's a little older. But this graph shows the number of species per area. And the blue is actually threatened and endangered species, and the red is rare and imperiled species. And if you look at the lands, or the numbers, you can actually see that not Fort Bragg, DoD lands have significantly more rare species on them than any other federal property. So something's right on these lands. If we look at Bragg itself, when we're managing the land, we can't manage in a bubble. We have a big property, but we also, we have a lot of external encroachment. So if you look here, this two population maps, 1990 and 2010. Let me see. So we got Fort Bragg, or Fayetteville here, Spring Lake, and over here is Aberdeen, Southern Pines. I want you to focus on this area right here. Very little dark green, right? It's really rural area in 1990. Flip over to 2007, or 10, I mean. See how dark that is? Huge expansion of population, lots of growth. In 2020 right now, it looks drastically different than that. Another area right here between Rayford and Fayetteville. between Rayford and Fayetteville at the bottom there is another really dark area. That area is continually growing, and it's really changed the way we train on Fort Bragg and the way we manage the base. Just north of that area is a big drop zone called St. Mary Glees. That has always been one of the most used drop zones on base, and we've stopped using it for heavy drops. They used to drop tanks, heavy artillery on that drop zone. Now, you miss with a tank, or not tank, I'm sorry, Humvees. You miss with a Humvee, you land somebody's yard on their house, causes problems. They don't even use it for that anymore. They still drop soldiers in there, but not heavy equipment. So it affects the way we train. It also affects the way we manage. You have houses right up next to your property line. It's kind of hard with, changes how you do your prescribed fires. So the longleaf pine wiregrass ecosystem, this used to cover about 90 million acres in the southeastern United States. It goes from southeast Virginia through the Carolinas, Georgia, through central Florida, all the way to East Texas. Now, less than 3% of that remain, and most of that is found in big public lands like Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, Fort Stewart, Eglin Air Force Base, Francis Marion National Forest, Apalachicola, places like that. So a lot of that's it's stuck to these big private lands. Some of the communities we see in this land this is what it would look like right now. Oh, shoot, my bad. We have dry leaf pinelands, which you're seeing there, and that's what it would look like this time of year. Not much green, a lot of brown. We have pine, scrub oak, sandhills, dry oak hickory, sandhill seeps, pecosins, vernal pools type thing. It is a fire-dependent system. Without fire, this ecosystem disappears. It turns to hardwoods, and all the rare species or the species that depend on fire disappear. These fires historically would happen between April and July. This area in North Carolina has one of the highest fire return intervals of anywhere known. It was between 1.5 and 3 years, and a big chunk of Bragg would burn every year, every 1 to 2 years. So lots and lots of fire. Native Americans historically would have started fires as well. They started fires for hunting, and they also for clearing land. Present day, we don't have those big wildfires. We can't have big wildfires on the landscape, so we use prescribed fire. We burn the base on a 3-year cycle. So every 3 years, the base gets burned. So like I said, this is what it looks like now. A healthy longleaf pine ecosystem is a 2-layer system. You have the canopy of trees, it's longleaf pine mostly, dominated longleaf pine. You have an open mid-story, so there's very few mid-story trees in this system. And then you have the ground cover, and the ground cover is where you find the diversity. Believe it or not, that's one of the most diverse ecosystems we have in America, in the United States. Another view. So again, when it's green, artificially looking at it, it doesn't look like much diversity, but when you get down and start looking on a smaller scale, that's where you start seeing lots of plants and animals. The diversity really in the system is in the drains. So you get along the creeks, this is where you're gonna find the diversity. In a well-burned drain, again, it's open. This is really high up in the drain, high up on the stream heads. But you get this openness, and if you look, it's a real thick, lush ground cover. Studies done on Bragg in the 80s, late 80s, in 1 meter square had more diversity or as much diversity as sites in the Amazon. So an insanely high diversity at a small scale. Now granted, when you get outside that 1 meter square, the Amazon beats it. But at a small scale, it's really, really diverse. The same thing when you get some bigger creeks. If you got a bigger creek, lower down, you still have that 2-layer system. It's a little bit thicker, but you don't have the mid-story issues. It stays open, and you have that very, very lush ground cover. Lots of diversity. You get stuff like this. Lots of orchids, Venus flytraps, lots of really cool stuff in these sites. Pitcher plants like those. Also have beaver swamps, cypress swamps. So we have 5 endangered species, federally endangered species on base. The red cockaded woodpecker, Michaud's sumac, rough-leaf loosestrife, American chaffseed, and the Saint Francis Satyr. So this is the red cockaded woodpecker, small black bird. As the name sounds, red cockaded, there's not much red on it. The actual red is on the head of a male. Females have no red at all. We always get called about redhead woodpeckers with a bright, bright redhead. That's not it. It's a very common species. We intensely monitor about 30 to 40% of this species, or sites on base of this species, and we ban them as adults, and we ban them as 7-day-old nestlings. And when they're in the cavities, we have to climb up crazy trees to get to them. We also provision cavities. This species needs old growth trees to put cavities in, and we can put cavities in trees much younger than what they can. So right now we have over 3,000 cavities that we've put in over the years on the base for this species. American chaffseed, another endangered plant. This guy's found on the ecotone between the drains and the uplands. It's high on the uplands, but if you'll notice the habitat around it, it's wide open. This is another one of the species that needs lots and lots of fire, and you're going to hear me say that a lot today. Ooh. Roughleaf loosestrife, this guy's found down in the drains near the creek. Another species, as soon as it gets shaded out and you don't have enough fire, it disappears. And if you'll notice the light green here, that's all this plant. There's hundreds of them in this picture. It shows sumac. This is an upland species, stays in sandy soils, highly disturbed, also needs fire. We have over 1,200 species of plants on base, so it's very, very diverse. 42 of those plants are either listed federally or state at some level of rarity. The one on the left there, that's pixie moss, sandhills pixie moss. 90% of this population is found on Bragg. So it's a species that stands, as the name sounds, it's moss. It's a plant, but it looks like a moss. Stands less than half an inch high. So if you don't have fire, this guy gets shaded out and it disappears from landscape. Some of our other more flashy species, pitcher plants, sandhills, fire lily, and we have the farthest known site populations of Venus flytraps. I'm a herp guy, I'm a heart of hearts, so I had to put some herp slides in there. We have over 95 species of herps on base. This is ornate coarse frogs. This is a species that's declining range wide and not in real great shape. Some of our sandhill species, we have long pine snakes on the left middle there. We have southern hognose, and those species is not doing well. And there's on the bottom right is coachwhip. Pine Barrens tree frog on the left is another sandhills species. Up left, top left is Carolina gopher frog, another one of the species that's really declining range-wide. So now, finally, get to the butterfly. Saint Francis Satyr, again, is one of the rarest butterflies in the world. It is a small brown butterfly, and looking at it from a distance, you don't see much color. But when you get close in a picture like this, which is the best picture I've seen so far of the species, taken by Dave Pavlik, you really get to see the color and the beauty in the species. Wingspan is like an inch, inch and a half. It's a mostly brown butterfly with these orange, rusty rings and bands on it. And then you have these opalescent eye spots. Give you a brief history of the species. It was discovered in 1983 by Thomas Krall. He was a 20-something-year-old soldier training on Fort Bragg, and he saw this butterfly and knew it was something different. He'd never seen it. So he wrote a paper, described it as a new species. Thomas Krall was a rabid butterfly collector. He collected a lot of rare species. He collected a lot of butterflies. And so writing his paper, he collected a bunch, and he collected a bunch later. This beaded butterfly at the time was known from one site, and by the late 1980s, it was empty. No butterflies, completely extirpated. We thought the species was extinct. Mostly believed because of collections of butterfly collectors. Early 1990s, the butterfly was rediscovered, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service promptly emergency listed as endangered. 1995, it was formally listed. 2002, Fort Bragg contracted Dr. Nick Haddad to start working on the butterfly so we could learn more about the species because we really didn't know much about it at the time. 2003, we started captive rearing experiments. 2010, habitat restoration. 12, we got a greenhouse. And 2019, captive breeding, and I'll come back to this stuff. Before I start with that, I want to go ahead and do the acknowledgments. Like I said, Dr. Haddad started on Bragg in 2002, And the vast majority of knowledge we have for the species is because of him and his lab. We've had a long-term, like I said, from 2002 to now, so 17-year span, so that's a lot of institutional knowledge that's built up. We've also had a lot of first-class students come through working on this species. We've had 3 PhDs that were projects that were done on this, including Eric Henry here with us today. She's been working on Bragg for 6 years. Heather Kenton's been on Bragg for, I think, 10 years. Elsie Kinka-Bush has been on Bragg for another 7 or 8 years. So we've had this real long, institutional knowledge that's really helped us. It's not just like a master's student who comes in for 2 years and is gone. We got this really built up knowledge. Dr. Becky Bartell for the Fish and Wildlife Service, she also got her PhD working on this project. So it's really paying off this relationship, collaboration we have. And again, Fort Bragg Endangered Species Branch. So there's the worldwide distribution of this species right there in black. You see it? You see it? A little dot. This species has never been found off Fort Bragg. It's only known from the base from about 200 acres. In reality, we're talking 40 or 50 acres. It's a very, very small range. It is a subspecies of Mitchell satyr, which is also federally endangered. It's found in Michigan, Virginia, and Alabama. DNA studies say that these species should be completely separated out into individual species, but that has yet to be published. Basic biology, the caterpillars feed on sedges, which are wetland grasses. Carex micheliana and Carex atlantica seem to be the most important to the species. Carex turgescens also seems to be important. Since 2002, Nick's lab has been looking intensively, and especially Erica, for these caterpillars in the wild. And since 2002, we found 2. One was feeding on Carex micheliana, and the other was on a board, not even on a plant. So that didn't help. That wasn't very helpful. Their habitat, again, they feed on sedges. So these sedges are found in these mucky, wet meadows along the drains. These are highly disturbed habitats, and I'll come back to that. The caterpillars have 6 instars, which means they molt 6 times before they emerge as an adult. And right now, they overwinter as a small caterpillar, about 1 inch long. They have 2 flight periods annually. So what does that mean? So I'm going to try this with this dot. I'm struggling with the dot here, but I'm going to try it. So right now, in the butterflies, the caterpillars are late instar caterpillars and are in diapause. So basically, they're sleeping right now. They're buried down the tussocks and the sedges and basically sleep. So as spring comes and these sedges start growing, they'll start feeding. And then in May, they'll go on chrysalis, and then a couple weeks later, they'll emerge as an adult. That's the first flight period right there. As they emerge as adults, they last as an adult for 2, maybe 4 days. They breed, they lay eggs. That's it. So we have the eggs in June, caterpillars, chrysalis, second flight period. Lay eggs, caterpillar, around, and then back to winter diapause. So that's 2 generations. So if we start with the butterflies we have now, or the individuals now, so it starts here in eggs, caterpillar, around. First generation, that's 9 months. And then the second generation is 3 months. This is the way it's always been since 2002, until a few years back, Elsie works under Nick, was out doing surveys and found butterflies flying in September, a 3rd flight period. We had no idea. Question is that 3rd flight period always been there, we just didn't know it, or is that something new? Is that something that's been brought on by climate change? We don't know. We have no way of proving it, but there's a 3rd flight period here now, and 4 out of the last 5 years we've had that 3rd flight period. I'll put this picture here to remind me, to let y'all know that Saint Francis Satyrs don't feed, they don't nectar as adults, even though this guy is. Since the early 90s, actually, we only know of 3 individuals that have been observed nectaring, and this is one of them. So it's kind of a false picture, because they don't really do it. So as I go through the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk about 2 different populations. We have population of butterflies outside of impact areas and butterflies inside impact areas. And the impact areas, again, is where they're shooting into, right? So outside of impact areas, we have all the access we want. These are safe areas. We can go whenever we want to. Inside impact areas, it takes a lot of coordination to go in there because they're shooting in there. So for now, we'll talk about just the sites outside impact areas because this is the sites we have the most information on. So if we look at this graph, this is the population of the sites we have. So from 2002 to 2010, the population was pretty stable, between 500 and 700 individuals. We did have a big blip in 2004, which we aren't really sure what that was, but there was a lot of butterflies in 2004. And then in 2010, the population crashes and just completely blips out to nothing. Well, what happened? Well, one thing that happened was we had a fairly long-term drought, and a lot of our creeks on base, the creeks were fine, but above the creeks and the upper drainages, the muck just dried up. The sedges disappeared, and when the host plant's gone, the butterfly disappears. So in quick, short order, we lost a lot of sites on base, and it was a pretty scary time for us. We thought we were going to lose the species in these sites. Well, fortunately, we started some restoration work, and captive rearing efforts started paying off when we started releasing butterflies. So in 2010, we did our initial habitat restoration work, and in 2011, we really ramped that up. And then 2012, we started captive releases. And the red line shows butterflies that are observed in restored habitats. So with the habitat restoration and the captive releases, we actually have a decent population now, and it seems to be fairly stable. So this population structure is species. So if you look, they live on the creeks, like I said. And if you have the butterfly colonies, let's see. So we have like what's basically what's known as a meta population. So you have colonies, you have habitat where the butterflies can have, and as the butterflies will move up and down the creek, as habitat gets available for the species, they will move into these habitats. Problem is, now this species is so rare that when a site blinks out, there's no other butterflies close by to repopulate it. The species doesn't move a lot. Since 2002, we've only observed 2 colonizations of new sites, both within 200 meters of known sites. That's not really a big movement. We have had several butterflies that's moved over 350 meters, which is a good distance for the species. 2005 was kind of a oddball year. We had 2 that moved over 2 kilometers up and down the stream. So there were big movements, but that's not enough butterflies to actually create a new colony. So this is what some of the habitat looks like, and you're going to see the pictures I showed, there's a lot of variety in the habitat. This is your basic habitat. There'll be things that all these sites have. They have a high sedge density and a high sedge diversity. So if you look along the creek here, this is all sedge, all the grass-looking stuff is sedges. All the sites have the sedges. All the site has some sort of shade component. Too much shade, not a good thing. Not enough shade's not a good thing. It's kind of like Goldilocks in the middle. Another view. As I said, this habitat requires disturbance. There's 2 disturbances that we think are important: fire and beavers. We have sites that are completely fire maintained, and we have sites that seem to be completely beaver maintained. And these sites do look different. And then we have that gray spectrum as you do in nature, where you have some that are in the middle between fire and beaver. These are dynamic habitats. So we can take a site like this that is not good quality butterfly habitat. You wouldn't find any butterflies in there. You can have some friendly beavers come and stop that culvert, flood it out. The beaver leaves, and you have this beautiful sedge meadow, and butterflies are frolicking and having a good time. And then a beaver shows back up, and that site's gone. So these sites with the beavers especially can be really dynamic and can change quickly, which causes us to have conflicting management strategies. If we have a good site, and we have very few good sites, beavers flood it out, we can't really let that site completely flood out, right? So we will let them flood a half, maybe 2/3 of the site, but we can't let them completely flood it. So we discourage beavers. We'll put a fence up, or we'll do something trying to reduce the water level. Sites that we need habitat work done, we'll encourage beavers. We can do stuff to encourage beavers to make dams. And then when beavers won't cooperate, we just turn into beavers and do it ourselves. Make dams, we cut trees, and we've done a lot of it. So in 2011, Nick and a few other universities got a big grant looking at butterfly habitat restoration on military installations. And so with that, we started this experiment in 2011. So we had the experiment designs. Basically, we had a control. We did nothing. We had sites where we dammed them. We had sites where we cut the hardwood out. And basically, we'd go cut the trees out, put them on a shoulder, and hike them out. And then we had sites where we did dam removal, hardwood removal, and dam installation. So what does it look like? We had a historic site up on the top there. And then we had these 30 by 30 meter squares downstream, upstream from that. So we had sites where, like I said, control, the dam, the cut, and the cut and dam. And we had 4 replicates of that. So before restoration, you couldn't walk through these sites. Super dense, super thick, low diversity, not much going on there. We did have sedges there, but very, very low density. You can see all the vines, terrible stuff to walk through. So top right there, we go in, cut it out, haul it out. When we finish working on these sites, it looks like a big mud hole. This site's pretty dry. Sites can be, that's one of the drier sites. We could have sites where we're actually in knee-deep water and almost thigh-deep muck, which is interesting when you're cutting trees and hauling them out. And the dam installation, this is called an aqua dam. These are used for flood control. It's basically a big tube, put water in it, and that's what we use for dams. So on the right is one of our drier sites. That's just a cut site, but you can still see the sedges there. On the left is a cut and dam site. Got the aqua dam there. On the right of that site, you see it wasn't cut. The left was cut, and you can see the sedges. And we say we flood the sites. We're talking inches of water. We're not talking about feet. We just want to make saturate the soil, really, make it mucky. Lo and behold, butterflies quickly colonize the sites that we cut hardwoods out of. We cut the hardwoods out, we got sun to the ground, butterflies showed up. Not a lot, but they did show up. So that experiment ran for 4 or 5 years, right? So what do you do when we got this thing that works, we're getting butterflies there, so what do? You keep cutting. So we cut the sites that weren't cut before, and we're still cutting. So we joined them. So I mentioned earlier that meta population. Now we're connecting those sites and trying to get this mosaic of habitats. So some of these sites were cut in 2011, some are cut this year, some are cut in 2015. So we had that whole mosaic of sites up and down the drainage. But does that actually benefit the population, right? So are we creating sinks? Are we creating sources? What are we doing? Is it actually working? So Erica and many others measured, watched, looked for butterflies months on end in these sites and got a lot of data to find out. And this is what we're looking for. So disturbance, if you have disturbance on the bottom and population growth on the y-axis, so the disturbance is by beaver, fire. So on these sites mainly it's beaver because that's what we're doing. You have a source and a sink line, right? So anything below that, we're creating habitats that are actually taking butterflies out of the population. Above it, we're creating butterflies, positive thing. So that's what we're looking for. That's our target, make a source. But we need to know is, when does it become good habitat? So when can we release butterflies there? And then when does it start becoming a sink so we can go back and do re-restoration, do some more work, open it back up, and restore the habitat again. So a few years back, Erica figured out that Micheliana and the interaction between Micheliana and Carex atlantica play a big role, both species. So if you look at the dark purple, that's Micheliana. The light purple is atlantica. On the bottom is years since restoration. So right here is 1 year after restoration, not many sedges. Second year, atlantica explodes. Lots and lots of atlantica, and the butterfly, which is the dotted line, population kind of tracks that. By year 4, Micheliana is kind of taken over. It's a bigger species, it's more robust, it shades out the atlantica. And then by year 6 after restoration, you see the butterfly population starting to go down. So at some point, this is all, top is all source. We're creating butterflies there, but at some point that's going to become a sink. And where is that sink exactly? Is that year 6, year 7, year 8? We need to figure that out, and that's what we're in the process of doing. That's when we need to go back and actually restore, do restoration work. So if we look at individual sites within the bigger colony, 2011, that's when we did a restoration work. And you see, this kind of growth is there. There's butterflies there, but a real low number. So there's butterflies finding it, but they're not really a strong population. So what happened? Well, we released butterflies there. So if you look at M2, we started releasing butterflies there in 2012, and it takes multiple releases. You're not just releasing once and everything's fixed. It takes multiple releases. But you can see we have a strong population from 2015 till now. The D sites, we started dropping there in 2017. Those sites are on the rise. So with that 1-2 hit with the restoration and with the releases, we're getting some positive feedback from the population. Captive rearing. So where are we getting these butterflies to release? It's captive rearing. We will go into impact areas on real strong sites. We will collect females that are gravid, have eggs, bring them back into the lab, and they lay eggs, and we rear those into adults. When this started out, our lab was a piece of plywood strapped between two trees with a tarp over it, and it was that way for years, and there's a lot of butterflies produced on that table. Now we've upgraded. Oh yeah, I forgot about this one. So this is a pretty cool slide. This is one we actually got to see emerge from the chrysalis as an adult. And so from that picture there to this one was about 5 to 10 seconds elapsed time. So these guys, when they decided to come out, they came out quick. And it really blew my mind that they could come out that quick. I figured it would be a slow process, but it was really quick. That is the first butterfly. It's a great picture, I know. First butterfly we released on base. So now, like I said, we upgraded. We've got a greenhouse dedicated to this species. It's at our office on Fort Bragg. So now we've got a controlled environment. We can have these nice habitats we can raise them in, rear them in. And so we've really kind of upped the game. And this year, we actually seems like we figured out captive breeding. Dave, the crew lead, and the crew this year did a lot of good work figuring out this. They had over 20 pairs and mate in captivity. So between the restoration and the captive breeding, we can really ramp up the number of butterflies we're producing. So the sites outside the impact area might start really getting that good upward trend that we're wanting to see. I'm a lot more comfortable by now than I was 4 or 5 years ago. Now, the colonies outside the impact area. Outside, okay. So we only have 2 colonies, 2 colonies on 2 drainages. So right now it's not real secure, but the trend now with the releases and the restoration we're looking up. Inside impact areas, we have 1 colony with over 1,000 individuals, and these are guesses. We're going to these sites once a year, maybe twice a year. We see a bunch of butterflies, so we can take those numbers and kind of correlate it with what we're seeing outside, but these are guesses. We have 4 colonies with somewhere between 200 and 500, 4 smaller colonies. These are found on 3 creeks. And some of our historically largest colonies we can't get to anymore, just because there's too much explosives on the ground and it's not safe to go there, so we don't go. So what are the differences? Well, if you look at the red on that map, that's our drop zones, or that's our impact areas. And what do you not see in those impact areas? Well, there's no roads. We don't have that fire break system. There's no roads. There's no roads crossing the creek, so you're not getting that sediment washing in. There's also room for beavers. Beavers can have this whole mosaic of dams up and down these whole drainages. And then there's lots of fire. Military is really good at starting fire. They start lots of fires. They start it with heavy artillery. They start it with bombs. They start it with flares. They start it with tracers for machine guns, which is probably the way most of them start. When a fire starts in an impact area, we don't put it out. We don't go in there because it's not safe. So even though it started from training or whatever, after that it's a wildfire, it's a natural fire. It burns like a natural fire, and those burn differently than what we can do safely with prescribed fire. So outside impact area, this is what we saw. We have the sites, and the difference we're going to see here is between the sites. So here, these areas are really choked out and nasty. Butterflies don't fly through them, and there's very few sedges in them. Inside impact area, we have these, in green, we have these transition habitats. It's wide open. Butterflies can fly through them, and you have drains or sedges throughout. It's actually a true metapopulation. So this is our largest site and one of our most shaded sites. So you'll see some of the variety in what we have. This site, if you look in the back, that's Nick. He's 6'3", I believe. He's in waist-high or chest-high sedges. Hundreds and hundreds of butterflies here. Absolutely cool spot. He's also probably in knee-deep water. This is one of the few sites we have that's this shaded. Beavers have now dammed below this site, and so there's a good chance we'll go back next year, it'll be flooded out, and there might not be anything there. We don't know. These are the transitions I was talking about. See how open those drains are? There's no mid-story. There's no shrubs. It's wide open. The bottom is probably chest-high cane, but still full of sedges. These are some of our fire-maintained sites. The top right is our sunniest site. And down below, and this site, top right, if you see a butterfly, it's going to be right next to the trees. They're hugging that shade. It's too much sun. Bottom left, that site, if you see butterflies there, they're going to be around the stem and ferns in the back or around the trees. You also notice the diversity in this drain right here. All the pitcher plants, and right about there, I believe, is a rough-leaf loosestrife. There's thousands of these plants in there, endangered plants. So crazy diversity, tons of orchids. Beautiful, beautiful place. And why is that open? It's because of fires. These flares that are landing in, it's the bullets. That's what keeps these areas open. That's what keeps these areas looking like what they used to look like when Europeans first arrived. And that's what makes a lot of this stuff so special in Fort Bragg. And it's also the reason why this species has been in the media. Every article, everything's been written about this thing lately is all about bombs, bullets, butterflies, everything. And so that whole juxtaposition between this dainty butterfly and the explosions, the bullets, people love it. So anyway, with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. All right. If you're down here with us on the first floor and have a question, wave at me. I'll bring you a microphone to make sure everyone in the room can hear. If you're on the second or third floors, just wave down at me. We'll point up at you. You yell down, and we'll use the microphones to repeat the questions and make sure that everybody in the room can hear. So if you've got one, wave at me. But I'm curious, while y'all think of some questions too, you mentioned discovering that there might be this third generation that happens within a year. Do you not see the third generation in the captive breeding? So in the greenhouse, are there just the two?
We do, absolutely, yeah. We've started seeing that. Beforehand, we had a small captive population, and so when you get the third generation, the second generation, a portion of those goes third generation, a portion of them stay as caterpillars. So with a small population, the chances of you getting that third generation is smaller. And so that's why, like in the wild, the sites that we actually see the third generation in are the most robust and biggest sites. So, and we do see it in the captive population now, though.
And then what do we know about this butterfly's populations historically, if anything? I guess it was only really named in the early 80s. But do we expect that when sandhills covered 90 million acres of the southeast, that this butterfly was all over the place? Or is there something particular about North Carolina sandhills? You would have only found that butterfly there.
I don't know. Yeah, we just don't know. We have such limited information on this species. And ideally, it's probably a lot more widespread. The Sandhills region wasn't 90 million acres. It was the Longleaf system. Sandhills region is actually fairly limited strip between the coastal plain and the Piedmont. But even still, we just don't know.
So I noticed in one of your photos there was either an officer or an enlisted man. How often do they help, and are they volunteering, or are they dedicated Army staff that help you out in the field?
As far as the actual surveys and stuff, the military doesn't help with that. I'm a DoD civilian employee, so we have civilian employees, and then we have the contract through Nick's Lab, people like Erica here that actually do the actual survey work. But as far as actual work, no, military individuals are not involved.
I'm going to look upstairs. I see you waving. Do you have to contend with rattlesnakes and water moccasins?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm in my heart of hearts, I am a herp guy, I'm a snake guy, so that's a benefit for me. But we like to joke around that when we're restoring butterfly habitat, we're also restoring cottonmouth habitat. When we open these sites up, we create a lot of sun on the ground and great basking areas for the snakes. So we do see a lot of cottonmouths. We do also have pygmy rattlesnakes and timber rattlesnakes on Bragg, but timber rattlesnakes are extremely rare. Pygmies are rare to common.
Are the wild moccasins aggressive, or they kind of stay out of your way?
Mostly stay out of your way. Yeah, they're not aggressive.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this related species of satyr, this is sometimes called a subspecies of, is it also relying on sedge? And if so, why are its numbers dropping as well?
It is relied on sedges.
Can you repeat that question? So it was, do the other species of satyr also rely on sedge like this subspecies?
So the Mitchell satyr, right? So yes, they also live in boggy sedge meadows, and they are feed on the sedges, different species of sedges, but on the sedge. The meadows up north sedges up north in Michigan are more long-term. They're not disturbance dependent like the ones here. But why that species is so limited, I couldn't tell you. Mm-hmm.
See one in the back. Question from the internet. Brian Stewart wants to know, how does the phylogeny of the species interact with the timing of southeast North Carolina weather, for example, hurricanes?
I don't understand how this species survives the hurricanes, to be honest. They're on these sedges. Some of these areas get absolutely blasted by floodwaters and intense floodwaters. How these inch-long caterpillars make it, I can't answer that question. It's always baffled me. And we've had some sites actually with big beaver dams bust upstream, and you'll have thigh-deep rushing water across these sites, and somehow they're there the next year. So I'm not sure how they do that.
So I had this might be a strange question, but you were saying the military personnel aren't involved with the restoration efforts. But how aware do you think they are of what you all are doing on the base?
It varies a lot with individuals. We try to get it out there, but it really depends on the soldier itself and how much they know. It varies a lot, I guess the best way to say it.
I just think it'd be interesting for them to see, some of the impacts of their training is having this effect. It'd just be interesting to kind of have that.
I think there's little doubt if it wasn't for the base itself and the training that this species wouldn't be there anymore. I mean, it's definitely dependent, like the fire and the protected lands has a lot to do with it.
But you can't really put like a keep off the grass sign.
We can put up signs, but prefer not to.
All right. Any others wave down at me? One more.
Along the streams where you did the hardwood removal and exposed more sunlight along the streams, have you been seeing any colonization from invasive plants? And how might that be a problem?
It would be a problem, but we really haven't seen it, which is a good thing, yeah. But we have not seen that.
Let's give Brian one more round of applause. Thanks for coming out today.
Appreciate it. It was
Sharing
fun.
your work with us here at the museum. Thanks to all of you for coming out. Thanks for watching online. We'll see you again here next week for Lunchtime Discovery. Bye, everybody.